Hi folks, really glad that you came out tonight. I don't know about you, but we need a new governor. And I'm really happy that we have people that want to tell us why they will do a good job. So thank you all a lot for coming. I know that you travel and travel. And we do have a couple of empty seats, and I'm just going to point those out because to me that tells a story. We did have everyone confirmed a couple days ago. Janet Mills told us she was tired. I don't know about you, but I'm freaking exhausted from fighting against all this stuff. Whatever. We're not really sure where Mark is. Maybe something happened, but we're going to get rolling because we have candidates that want to tell you the job that they can do. So I want to also remind you that we have a Indivisible MDI is sponsoring this event, and we have a swag table out there with some stickers and bags and things. So feel free to partake in that. And then one of the most important things to share with you tonight for sure is to remind you that June 12th is an election. And it is an election that matters deeply to Mainers on many levels. We will use ranked choice voting for the very first time in the country. And many of us have fought for that, but the important thing to understand is that it is not a done deal. We have to vote on June 12th to preserve ranked choice voting going forward. So it's really important, whether you are connected with a party and plan on voting in a primary or not, you need to go, we need you to go to the polls on June 12th and vote for yes on the people's veto question 1. It's just brutally important. Even if you are not voting in a primary. We do have some people from ranked choice voting here with lots of information. We might not be in this predicament if we had been able to use this before. So it is really crucial that we show up. And it's weird, I know, because we all feel like we have done this. Haven't we already voted like a few times on ranked choice voting? And we have. But this is just the way the process works. We have to ensure that we will be able to use it going forward, and if this fails on June 12th, then I believe the earliest, maybe Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the earliest that we can even consider implementing it would be 21 or 22.
Well, the current law will allow us to consider it in the next legislature.
Okay.
We would take legislative action.
Right, as opposed to just the people's initiative, right? It would take legislative action to get it not just what we said that we wanted. So anyway, I just want to implore you, and I don't know, I feel like it isn't even enough for just us to go to the polls. Like, that's the place we're in. It really isn't. You need to go find somebody to go with you. You need to call a friend who maybe doesn't feel like voting, it's only a primary, and say, we need to go, and I'm going to give you a ride. So I'm just going to put that out there for you. We are honored to be moderated once again by Jill Goldthwaite. She has wide experience. She went to Tonga as a Peace Corps volunteer. She moved to Maine in 1978 and settled in Bar Harbor. She worked as an emergency department nurse at MDI Hospital and served on the Bar Harbor Town Council for 9 years prior to running for Maine State Senate. An unenrolled independent, she won 4 terms in the state senate before being unable to run for re-election due to term limits. She then took a job with Jackson Laboratory in Bar Harbor, which later turned into a permanent position as Director of Government Relations. Jill continues to offer her considerable wisdom throughout our community, and we are so grateful that she will be moderating tonight. So.
Alrighty, we're off to a good start because as we got settled in here, these folks were talking to each other like they like each other. So I think that speaks well for the tenor of the evening. And I know you guys were magnificent the last time we did that for the second CD candidates. And so I'm sure we're going to have a good evening. I have two requests. One is when you speak, please try to be brief. And if the bios you submitted are any indication, we need a little in-service on brief. So if you will keep your remarks as brief as you can. And we're not going to time you unless you force us to. So I'll put it that way. We have a little different format here. MDI Indivisible had a genius idea. Rather than having the whole line of people recite an answer to every question, I'm going to ask the questions of one or two of you. If it's a question you're really dying to answer, just give me a sign and you may speak. But we're going to try to get more questions covered that way and maybe be a little more interesting for the audience. I have bios on everybody. I'm afraid this is going to be boring just because there are a bunch of them, but I'm going to plow through these as fast as I can, so at least you have a little thumbnail on each of the candidates that's here. Adam Cody is the first declared Democratic candidate for governor, and by the way, these were submitted by the candidates, most of them. Cody's leadership experience comes from being a 20-year decorated combat veteran with the U.S. Army National Guard, 16 years of experience as a clean energy entrepreneur, and a lifetime of civic involvement in his hometown of Sanford, Maine. In 2013, Adams' environmental work was recognized and celebrated by President Obama as a champion of change. And now he heads the energy and utilities practice at Drummond Woodsum in Portland. Adams, a graduate of Sanford High School, Colby College, and UMaine Law. He lives with his wife, Paulina, and their 5 young children in Sanford. He has served on numerous local and statewide boards, including the Sanford School Committee and the board of the Mid-Coast Regional Development Authority. Adam Cody. Donna Dione, in the middle there, is 66 years old, a Franco-American, married for 40 years to Mike, with a son Gary and a daughter-in-law Michelle and 2 granddaughters. She has worked as a finance director for 2 Portland nonprofits. She served 3 terms, total of 6 years, as the mayor of Biddeford, the 6th largest community in Maine, and was simultaneously chair of the school committee. She spent 12 years with Time Warner, setting up their first business operation in the Portland, South Portland area. She worked for York County Community College as coordinator of the largest state-funded quality center training program, successfully placing 307 new employees into the metal trades industries. She was also an instructor for York County Community College's entrepreneurial program. She has over 20 years of community volunteering with various boards, Coastal County's Workforce, Salvation Army, and 3 years on the Biddeford-Saco Economic Development Council and the Chamber of Commerce. Donna. Mark is really the only brief one because I had to steal it from Wikipedia. I didn't get a bio from you. Mark W. is an American politician and family therapist. He served 4 terms in the Maine House, the last 2 as Speaker, and was unable to run for another term due to term limits. So he's been out of the legislature for 2 years. He's a Democratic candidate for governor of Maine. Welcome, Mark. Diane Russell grew up in a mobile home in Bryant Pond, Maine. Her dad is a flatbed truck driver for a paving company, and her mother is a nurse. I'm running for governor to make the economy work for hardworking Mainers like my parents, says Diane. She knows how hard it is to get by because she's been there. When she first ran for office, she was working behind the counter at her neighborhood convenience store, earning $8 an hour. Diane will fight for working families and rural Mainers, higher wages, affordable health care, and eradication of the opioid addiction. She believes every child deserves a great education and that college education should be universal. Diane served in the Maine House for 8 years, where she championed working families. She was a key leader in reforming Maine's political system as a longtime champion of ranked choice voting. She also led the fight to legalize marijuana. Welcome, Diane. Is a longtime advocate for issues and legislation that protect the interests of working people. Betsy helped to write and pass the first Family Medical Leave Act in the country so that people could take time off to care for a sick family member without fear of losing their job. Her first two pieces of legislation were to raise the minimum wage and to ensure that equality in education was included in the Maine Human Rights Act. She has worked on every state budget for the last 35 years to ensure funding for crucial services for Maine people. In 1996, Betsy helped write Maine's first clean elections law because she saw that money was corrupting our political system by taking power and access away from real people and giving it to wealthy power brokers and corporations. Welcome, Betsy. Okay. The first question I'm going to ask of Betsy and Donna, and it's about the budget. How do you plan to generate funding for state services, including roads, schools, healthcare, etc.?
In 3 minutes. You know, I think the thing that's happened the most over the last 8 years is a question of priorities. My mother always used to say to us, you know what, when I know someone's priorities, you look at their checkbook and their calendar. And our checkbook in the state is totally out of balance. We have to remember that 2 years ago, the governor passed and the legislature passed a $400 million tax break for the most wealthy Mainers in the state and never paid for it. Didn't have any funding for it going forward. And that money has come out of our road construction and maintenance, our education, revenue sharing, services for people who desperately need it. So I think a lot of it is really looking at how do we change these priorities? How do we make sure that people come first? You know, I think about hungry kids a lot. 25% of our kids go to bed hungry at night. Really? That is just not something I think is okay. But the theory we've been operating on for the last 8 years is that somehow we're going to give a tax break to the wealthiest people and the wealthiest corporations, and then somehow they're going to invest it in some company that then is going to invest it in is going to hire a single mother with a couple of kids who probably doesn't have daycare, and that somehow then she's going to get a big enough wage so that she's going to be able to feed those kids. In my administration, we feed the kids first. And I think we have to look at where our priorities are. We have to look at fixing our tax structure. Our tax structure, I think our tax system is broken. And we have to look at growing the economy. We are never going to raise more, we are never going to be able to do all these things until we invest in Maine's economy. And for me, that's investing in the bottom up. Small businesses, entrepreneurs, the incredible number of young farmers who are moving into our state, who are, you know, it's this whole sort of low-level underground economy or in-ground economy of farmers, craft brewers. You know, we're spending our economic development dollars chasing companies from out of state, hoping they're going to come. They're not coming. Let's invest in the people who are here. I think those are just a few of the things, the ways that I would do it. And the last thing I would say, and this will probably come up again, is I would look at tax exemptions. Right now, the state of Maine gives more money away in tax incentives than it does than we actually spend in the budget. And that money goes to companies who have bought and paid for those special tax breaks so that, you know, they're allegedly going to do jobs or economic development. But we never go back and say, are you doing it? Are you doing it? Did it happen? So right now, we pay $5 million a year for a tax break that was done in 1972 for emissions from smokestacks that became federal law in 1976. There's $5 million right there that we could use to feed kids and invest in our education and our roads. So I think those are some of the things that I would do. You'd see a very different set of priorities with me as a governor.
Thank you, Betsy. And I did, before Donna speaks, I did have one other request that I forgot, but Betsy, you did a good lead off on that. Rather than focus on what has happened in the past in the state, even the recent past, if you will please try to speak to your own plans as we're going forward. Thank you. Donna.
You know, how to get more money into the budget so we can take some of the burden off of us. I classify myself as the money candidate because my background, my 45 years in finance, everything I have done is checks and balances for organizations that were having financial problems, operation problems. I see the same thing with the state. First of all, I want to bring respect back to Augusta. I want us to start talking about issues so we can look at our financial picture and make things move forward. For example, I mean, Betsy mentioned the individuals with exemptions. I would like to audit them. I'd like to look at the program and say, why did we give them exemptions? Have they stood up to the agreements that we've had? If not, how do we take those exemptions and either get more money into the budget or utilize those exemptions by providing exemptions to some of our entrepreneurs? How do we help them when they're making capital investments so that they can increase their business and add more people to their businesses, so we get more employment, we get more money into our revenue by growth internally. Eventually, we could probably have that same ability to lure some other businesses in, but that's not our first priority, is looking at the local businesses we have and how we can assist them by training, having a workforce that cost-wise, we do the training, and those exemptions would help out. Also, we need to audit the Medicaid fund. Because the Medicaid fund, I worked for a nonprofit for 20 years, and since 2005, not all Medicaid programs, but a good portion of them, every dollar we received, we had to give 6 cents back. I worked for an organization that was $12 million, and every month we gave between $45,000 and $50,000 back to the state based on that 6%. I want to know where that money's being used. I want to know if we can utilize it more effectively. My goal is to see how we can use current stuff before we start putting burdens on taxes or whatever else. Plus, I've been investigating for the last 3 months what 7 states already do. They look at their non-resident property owners who pay their taxes, and when they're here, they're paying sales taxes and whatever else. But they also do not pay a single penny into our infrastructure. They're using our roads and our bridges, but they're not responsible for helping us to repair them. And so 7 other states are looking at either property value balance or income values, and trying to decide on a percentage that you put along with, in my situation, looking at your tax bill. And twice a year, they may pay a very small percentage, maybe less than 1/4%, based on the value of their homes. And they do not pay a single penny of income tax in our state. And how do we have them assist us with the infrastructure? Taking the money that we already place in infrastructure and then relocating it to some of the priorities that we're looking at. School funding, even the insurance thing, affordable insurance. We need to evaluate money we have, how do we use it, is it being used as effectively as possible, and that has been my major thing over 45 years. I've been very effective in working with people, bringing people and collaborating, no matter what their political tag, no matter what their views are, is respecting their ideas and saying, now we come to the issues. It's not time to point fingers. It's not time for us to argue where we're going. It's time for us to move these main issues forward. And I plan on getting money back into the account, prioritizing what we need to do, and move Maine forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to shift to the environment. And someone has noted here from the Indivisible group, last year the Gulf of Maine was colder than normal due to ice from Greenland traveling in this direction. And then we're told that the Gulf Stream is sending warm water into the Gulf of Maine, which will make it markedly warmer. What's the governor to do? Diane.
I'm going to put a thermometer in the ocean. So the issue of climate change is really important and impactful for marine resources, and also if you want to fish in other parts of the state as well. I can't change the ocean acidification. I wish I could. I know I'm a fix-it girl, but I don't have the Hermione wand. I might have her intellect. But first and foremost, we need to believe in science. And the fact of the matter is, we also, in addition to the challenges that we're facing that way, we also have flood zones that are creeping up pretty precipitously, and we need to make sure that people are not going to lose their homes. But there are things that we can do on the issue of clean energy that I think are really important. First and foremost, I know people probably are not paying attention to the Iran deal because it doesn't really affect Maine people, except that it does, because the Iran deal, backing out of the Iran deal is going to force OPEC to reduce its supply of oil, which is going to directly impact our gas prices and our oil prices come this fall. So what is happening in Washington, D.C. and our foreign policy is going to have an impact. We need to be investing significant amounts of money in weatherization, because we need to stop being the grasshoppers and playing the fiddle, and we need to start being the ants and weatherizing all of our homes so that we can reduce our consumption of oil. It's going to reduce our costs, it's going to reduce our consumption, and it's also going to reduce our carbon footprint. That's something that we can do right here in Maine. Secondarily, I really believe that we need solar power, not just because we feel good about it, but it also is a national defense. When you think about all these storms that are happening, and we are having more and more storms that are causing power to go out. We were lucky last fall that it was not the winter when the power went out for a week, but we need to make sure that everybody has solar power on their rooftops so that we can make sure that they're self-sufficient. We have seen repeatedly that the solar issue has been delayed, it has been stopped. We need to open up the doors on solar power, and I strongly support a feed-in tariff. I'm sure Adam at some point is going to talk about the smart grid, but he's absolutely right, I'm very passionate about making sure that we have a smart grid process. Those are two things that we can do in terms of climate change, but the real issue, we have to sign on to the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is the local version of the Paris Climate Accords. And if we do that and we meet the standards, we're going to be able to have a direct impact. And it's not just what we can do to fix the oceans, it's what we can do in our corner of the world, which then gets added on to other corners of the world, and the cumulative effect will have an impact. So signing on to the Paris Climate Accords and actually codifying that from the Energy and Utilities Committee, we voted it down, and I want to explain why. Because
Briefly, please.
I did not want the governor to determine what the climate plan should be, because there would not be science in it. But the next administration needs to put that at the top of the forefront to develop a comprehensive approach to climate change mitigation in this state, not just in terms of how we mitigate our impact, but also how we address the very real challenges that climate change is presenting.
Thank you. Lightning round. The audience knows this one, but you guys don't. It's a one-word answer to a question that I hope only needs one word. So the first one, we'll start down at your end, Betsy. Do you acknowledge that climate change is largely caused by human activities?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Diane?
Yes.
Donna?
Yes.
Easy peasy. Okay.
Are they all going to be that easy?
Yeah, I already- oh my God.
I think you're setting us up.
Adam, what
Here
if
we go.
anything, yeah, what if anything should be done to prepare for sea level rise on the Maine coast?
Climate action plan that Diane just brought up, that first and foremost, the first thing the next governor has to do comprehensively to deal is to come up with a climate action plan. Stepping back a little bit, Governor LePage got rid of the state planning office, so a lot of the long-term planning that we should do, we haven't been doing. With the rising sea level, the fact that the Gulf of Maine is being affected, more than 99% of the waters throughout the world, this is going to affect us. So we need not only a mitigation plan, but a resiliency plan, and a plan to recognize that this is already happening. So with respect to a mitigation plan, it addresses, I'd commission the commissioner of the EPA to, and also DMR, Department of Marine Resources, to go over and really go through everything from our shoreland protection zones, seeing how the effects it'll have on wetlands, tributaries, coastal properties, all of these types of things. You first need to determine how the effect is going to be, and secondly, you come up with mitigation plans. And I would encourage them as well to include emergency management plan, because in addition to the rising sea level, we're dealing constantly with superstorms that are happening, and it's only a matter of time before it hits us here. With respect to other mitigation areas, it's building up better areas along the coast to provide for that. With respect to ocean acidification, a lot of the other problems we're having, I would support having Maine be involved in more regional cooperatives, sort of like RGGI, which is a regional greenhouse gas initiative. I believe there are 9 states, I believe, that are all a part of it, where we all cooperate and we all agree on emissions. I think we should do the same thing, whether it's dealing with ocean issues, rising sea level, coming up with some uniform plans. It's the same thing with transportation. And these are things that governors should communicate with one another in the regions and also in the Maritimes to come up with these types of plans. And that's just dealing with the, you asked specifically on rising sea levels. So the other piece I would say about that is the effects it will have on our economy. The fisheries, lobster industry will be and already has been affected by this. You're seeing it rising further and further north. Gulf of Maine Research Institute recently did a study on this, and their recommendation would be to form partnerships within the Maine Lobster Association and others so that they could recognize that, deal with traps issues, deal with other issues, and recognize the evolving part of our climate. That's sort of a, I guess, a grab bag approach. I just shot out lots of different things. The big main point that I would say that we need to do immediately is to come up with a plan. The good news, and I'll close with this, the very, very best of news is that Maine has a tremendous amount of leaders throughout our state in the nonprofit and public and university sector. The Climate Action Center at the University of Maine, the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, Acadia Senator, Island Institute. These are globally renowned places, and they've done studies on this, and it's incorporating a lot of those thought leaders and having them be a part. The only thing that's been missing, frankly, in the last 7 years is leadership at the government from the state level, and I provide that. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I just want to say one quick, really exciting project I just want to tell you about. I would love new ideas. So about ocean acidification, my sister's working with a company called Ecovative, and they are using the mycelium under mushrooms. You know, it's very tough if you ever turn a compost pile over, you know, it's hard to turn over. And they're using that to grow it to replace styrofoam. So Dell Computer and Crate and Barrel are now using it. So instead of getting things packed in styrofoam that has a half-life of, 10 million years, it's compostable and you throw it in your garden. Well, she is now just on the end of commercializing these, that's using that same material for buoys. Because the styrofoam in the ocean, in our buoys, is actually adding to the ocean acidification. So they last 2 years. I'm the granddaughter of a lobsterman from North Haven. And so we were afraid that, they wouldn't last long enough. And they said, oh, we only get 2 years at most out of a styrofoam buoy. So these are these incredible buoys, lightweight, economically competitive. And the only thing is right now, the company is based out of Troy, New York. And I said to Sue, if you're gonna make these buoys, you have to grow them in Maine because it's dark, it's cold, and we're full of, so we have lots of ways to do mushrooms. But I think it's an idea of the kind of thing that has many, right? So it'll help with the ocean, it'll help with growing the economy, and it's a new technology that people are excited and interested in that's gonna grow. So I just think those are some of the things that are the positive sides of some of these really tough issues that we're facing. Thanks, Betsy.
Question for Mark. What will you do to move our state toward 100% renewable energy?
The two greatest opportunities that we have within our renewable sector, solar and offshore wind. I think folks have done a good job kind of framing the larger issue, but those are two specifics that we can do within our state and be leaders on. The first on offshore wind. They call it the Saudi Arabia of wind because there's so much, the right type of wind is produced in our Gulf for energy production. So working and continue to support the University of Maine and the research that is going on right here in our state. It is homegrown, and we should have been well advanced in this, but unfortunately, and I'm trying not to take a look back, Jill, but it is relevant that unfortunately the governor ripped up a term sheet, a contract that was had already been signed with Statoil. They would have put $1 billion worth of investment into our state. They essentially said, forget it, we're not going to do business with people we can't trust. And they went, I think it's Denmark, another country, they've dumped their money in there, they're out there going, Scotland. So we can't afford to have leaders that don't provide a predictable environment. So offshore wind and solar, we've been nibbling at the edges of trying to get a solar bill through that is really playing defense. When we do have a governor in the Blaine House that really supports solar in the industry, and we have a Democratic and Senate and House, we're going to be able to really open up our vision here and make sure that when we invest in solar, everybody can benefit from it. I think we have a little bit of a PR problem with solar at the moment in that people that can't afford it don't benefit from it and they don't see the value in it. But I have to tell you, if we can lift the cap on community solar so that more people can buy in and benefit from and see their CMP bills reduced, or their energy bills reduced, they're going to believe in it. We bought a home about 6 years ago in North Berwick. We live out in the woods now, and we were fortunate enough to have solar panels on the house when we bought it. And the difference in our CMP bill from the house that we had to the house that we got with the solar panels was dramatic. We don't pay more than $70 a month now in the dead of winter, when the furnace is going full time. We were paying well over $200 every month during the winter months. In the summer, we don't pay over $15 a month. If people started to see the benefit to their pocketbook, they're going to believe in this, and that's where I think we need to take the state. We need to reclaim our space within our clean energy economy. It is within our brand, who we are, protecting our environment, and honoring our heritage of Ed Muskie with the Clean Air, Clean Water Act, and getting back to Maine being known as a leader in this area. We can do it if we invest in those two things. There are a number of other things that we can, but those are the two things that we need to do immediately.
Thank you.
Can I jump on that too, Joe?
Yep.
I agree 100% with Mark. He's absolutely right. With respect to wind, we had a wind energy task force and an ocean energy task force at the culmination of Governor Baldacci's administration, where we brought business leaders together, with environmental leaders, talked about siting, talked about permitting. We haven't done anything with it yet under the LePage administration. A lot of the work has been done. Maine was actually ahead at that point. With respect to solar, we have enormous opportunities. We don't need to have that sort of environmental economic discussion anymore. I signed one of the largest solar deals in Maine history a year or so ago, and we locked in a 20-year rate for Kennebunk Light and Power, 20-year rate locked in at below market rates. In other words, cheaper to purchase power now, and they locked it in for 20 years. But the bigger point, the much larger point that I'd like to make is, if you look at state in the country that has not only the lowest electricity costs, but often the lowest taxes. This is important to emphasize, because on the Republican side, we're always getting criticized that we're just going to jack up prices. You look at those states, the common denominator most often is that they produce their own power. They made an investment, they made a strategic decision at one point in their state's history where they said, we're going to produce power. A lot of them, the old generation, oil, coal, also natural gas, but it's also the Tennessee Valley Authority. It's places where they said, we're going to do this. The next generation of power is clean, it is renewable, and it is cheap. I think this will have a multiplier effect for our economy and help create jobs and help us be leaders as well.
And can I just say one other thing, which is, and we are never going to achieve any of this until we get money out of politics. That's why I'm running as a clean elections candidate. Because you know what happened to the solar bill? We passed it with well over a veto-proof margin. And it was a very weak solar bill. And what happened? $75,000 between the veto and the override vote. We lost enough votes that we couldn't override the veto. Though the powerful forces of gas and oil are very strong, they play hard in politics, they play hard in Maine politics, and until we have a governor who says, I don't owe you a thing, I think we're going to struggle to move forward on this. That's why I'm running as a clean elections candidate.
All right, Donna, Maine has a phenomenal natural environment that attracts many people to our state. What will you do to ensure Maine's environment is protected for future generations?
Well, first of all, it's actually one of our products. That's how I look at it, because of tourism. That's what attracts the individuals to all these areas. You guys should know why the traffic coming to Bar Harbor in your area, the beauties of the ocean and even the trees and everything else that's in this area. I think we need to be serious about environmental issues. I, for one, have some experience when I investigated in our area what was smokestacks emitting into the air and how do we save our resources. And I found that there was air toxic vulnerable compounds being emitted into the air. And I fought, 21 businesses came to the table with their lawyers, which is always interesting, and we were able to look at environmental issues. And when you're talking about issues that might be 100 miles, it's still impacting everybody else, because the wind will carry those things anywhere. We know what's coming from the west and how that's impacting Maine. So I worked with a lot of individuals, chemical engineers and environmental lawyers, and we 8 months later, with their work, those 21 businesses and their attorneys, a collaboration in developing that strongest air toxic ordinance that existed in Maine, looking at what kind of impact in our neighbors, our forests, our gardens, our fields, our lakes and streams in that area, and minimizing it. And I think we need to be sensitive to where all of these toxic chemicals are floating too, and obviously in my situation, we were in Biddeford, we were right on the ocean. And we were right by, the Saco River. And we had Saco and Buxton, many communities that rose to the occasion and came to the plate. And that's what has to happen in each community. We need to evaluate the resources you have. What kind of negative impact is occurring? How can we collaborate? Because one size does not fit all. I can't say we're going to do this across the board. We need to evaluate how the resources are being used, how we're using them as a product to lure people here and increase the money in our economy. So that's what I would be looking, is working individually with each community, having them collaborate and talk about what are the dangers that exist in each community and how do we resolve them, address them, and developing regulations.
Thank you, Donna. Lightning round. Everybody ready? We'll start down at your end, Mark. Do you support or oppose offshore drilling in the Gulf of Maine?
I oppose.
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 Oppose. All righty. Moving on to
We
the
like those lightning
economy. Diane, Mainers should have access to long-term quality jobs throughout the state. What policies will you propose to promote economic growth and lead to the creation of more jobs in Maine?
I love this question, thank you. So first and foremost, I led the fight even when it wasn't popular, long before John Boehner was excited about it, to legalize marijuana. And people may not have liked that at the time, but now everybody's on board, so it's cool, I guess. But the fact of the matter is we've already created hundreds and hundreds of jobs as a direct result of that new policy, and once the commercial system is set up, we will have created thousands of jobs in rural parts of the state, no less. And there are already millions and millions of dollars being invested in Maine right now that you may not be seeing just yet. So that's really important. But the second thing is we need a new deal. We need a different way of thinking of the economy. We keep being told, as Betsy pointed out, that trickle-down economics is how it works, but it doesn't. And what we need to do is to invest in our workers, because when we all do better, we all do better. When I have extra money to put into buying a cup of coffee, that dollar that I spent gets circulated in the local economy 7 times. So we need to rethink it, and that means that we need a new deal. And considering we're the state of Francis Perkins, I think we're ready for it. We need the right to a good job with fair wages. If you cannot find a job for $15 an hour, we should put you to work filling potholes, and we all know there's lots of potholes. We should have the right to organize at work. We should have a right to quality health care without having to go bankrupt. We need a Medicare single-payer system, Medicare for all system. Yes, go for it. We need the right to equal pay for equal work, and we need to make sure that we have pay equity so that male-dominated industries do not get paid more than female-dominated industries simply because of the gender difference. We should have the right to a secure retirement. I want to do a public option retirement system to supplement Social Security. It's been done in California. We should have the right to a safe and affordable home, which most people in this state are having a very difficult time keeping. We should have the right to clean water, to nutritious food. We should have the right to a quality education. We should also have the right to be able to work free from discrimination and harassment. That includes sexual harassment. And we also should have the right to a public banking system. I would like to create a state public bank like the Bank of North Dakota, which takes our treasury when you pay your taxes in, and instead of storing it on Wall Street and investing it there, let's invest that money on Main Street, right here in Maine. Let's put it into infrastructure, which we desperately need. We all know the broadband is a problem. I grew up in the town with the last crank phone, so I might know a little something about that. We need to make sure that people can afford their student loans, so we can do student loans, we can do small business loans. But we have to package it as a new deal, an economic security bill of rights, because only when workers feel secure are they going to spend that money. That's how we build an economy that's not just for this generation, but that builds the building blocks for the next generation as well.
We have the last crank in Bar Harbor.
I'm retired to crank phone.
He's out there tonight. Donna, go ahead.
We'll be besties.
I think economic development comes on how do we put more money into all of these things that are was just said is very important. But at the same time, we need to look at what kind of training will take place so that we can provide some basic workforce training for individuals to assist the businesses to be able to expand, to bring more money into the economy, so they get more money to be able to put in more benefits and increase those wages and have a positive impact to every individual. I, for 7 years, was on the Workforce Investment Act Advisory Board. We looked at places that needed employees and how did we train them. That was an incentive to the business to invest more in the employees because we were assisting to match the job requirements to the positions that they had, which allowed them to grow. And we have to do that. There's a lot of federal money left on the table that we need to utilize for training. That incentive to take our entrepreneurs, look at the size of the business, look at their willingness to grow, and how we get more people. More people, better wages, increases the economy. In turn, then we're able to implement all of these great things that need to happen, but we need to get more money into the economy and help these little businesses to do that. I have, over a long period of time, worked with economic development. As a mayor in Biddeford for 6 years, we lost Biddeford Textile closed, hundreds of people. One of the lines at West Point Stevens, for people who know the blanket industry, went down to North Carolina. We needed to address how do we get more businesses open, how do we get people locally to be employed. At that time I was successful in getting funding, and we brought water and sewer across the turnpike, and what is now, for anybody who happens to be traveling up the turnpike, we have a major, what is called Biddeford Crossing, a shopping area or a market basket, and 20 other businesses exist. We were able to get that happening so that we could assist people in getting jobs. So we have to do an incentive by working with the businesses, looking at the resources they have, look at the training programs we have, get a collaboration so we can start getting more money into the economy, so we can start doing the affordable insurances, getting people to get paid time off, getting individuals with good pensions, getting people with new wages and increase that minimum wage. We have to do that, but we need the money to do that, and there is a process through economic development to have that strong foundation where we work with colleges and we work with centers of technologies, and we collaborate what businesses are out there, what training can you do, can we get paid internships, and we start doing that. As you see a growth in the economy, you see more money because people are earning more money, better jobs, and then we see the increases in wages, increases in jobs, and Maine starts going in the right direction.
Thank you. Betsy, I want to ask you the jobs question, but with a little variation that I think suits your particular background.
Okay.
What would you do to address the quality of jobs, wages, and benefits for individuals at the bottom of our economy who are falling further and further behind?
Great. It is an issue that I worked on for a long time. I worked to make sure that low-income folks in the state have both access to services and access to economic opportunity. I think it's we have to come at it two ways. One is we have to come at it from training for the workers, but then we have to come at it for how we value those jobs. Right now, there's signatures were collected to look at direct care workers. I work with people with mental health issues and behavioral health issues and developmental disabilities. We cannot hold on to any of those workers, those direct care workers, to keep people out of institutions, which is where they need to be, out of institutions and in their homes and in our communities. And they all make less money than most people who work at McDonald's or Walmart. So this thing that we care about most, which is taking care of our people, is valued and paid less than we pay people to flip hamburgers or work at Walmart or whatever it is. We have got to figure out how do we increase those wages. I worked on legislation for the past 3 years trying to increase those wages by increasing the state contracts. So I think part of it is valuing the work that we do and that people do that are at low wages. I think there is another whole piece of this, which is, and Diane mentioned it, which is the sexism of it, right? The wages that are considered women's work are lower than wages that are considered men's work. And it's been that way for centuries, and we've got to turn that on its head. Because what do we need? What matters? I'll never forget that when my first child was born, I came home, she was 4 months old, and I went out for the first time. And a friend of mine's daughter came in, and she babysat my daughter, and her boyfriend mowed my lawn. And I came home, and everybody was fine, and I went to pay them, and I realized in my own head, and I've been a strong feminist my whole life, I went to pay her $20 for taking care of this precious thing I cared more about than anything in the world, and I was going to pay him $40 for mowing my lawn. And as I took the money out, I was like, oh my God, and I just went like this. Because I was like, so I think that's a piece of it. Excuse me. And then I think the other thing is we've got to look at the training of our workers. We have got to make sure, we have got to increase the technical and trades of our young people and provide those opportunities so that we can compete for good paying jobs and bring good paying industries, the solar industries, the technology industries, the entrepreneurial folks. We do nothing to help those businesses, or very little to help those businesses in Maine. And I think when we attract those kind of jobs, we will attract jobs that pay better. The last thing I will say is I think we have to make sure that college is affordable. College debt is crushing us. I'm here with two of my twins over right here, Danny and Thea are here with me, and their friend Clara, and they're both in college. They're sophomores in college. They're wonderful, but they're sophomores in college. Student debt is crushing us. So there are so many young people who can't move to Maine or can't stay in Maine because they can't afford to find a job that pays enough to pay their student debt. So we have got to deal with that. I have a program that I wanted to offer every high school student in Maine, senior high school student in Maine, the opportunity to give a year of community service, doing some of those jobs that aren't being done, elder care, daycare, trail building, weatherization, and in exchange, they get 2 years of tuition either at a community college or the last 2 years of a 4-year education at any institution in Maine, not just the Maine university system, but we get the Bates and the Bowdens and the Hussons and everybody to play. Because so many of our students start college, 67% start college, but only 36% finish. And it's often those last 2 years. So this is an incentive. You give back, you get that sense of community, of belonging to something, and then you get something in exchange, and that's tuition at the end. So I think that those are, it's a multi-pronged problem. I also think we have to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. I mean, we cannot, I don't think anybody in Maine believes that we should pay, someone can work 40 hours a week and not be able to pay rent and put food on their table. And so I think we have to work towards that very much, so.
All right, thank you. Mark, we have a problem with both homelessness and affordable housing in Maine. What initiatives would you like to see that would address those?
Well, one of the issues that I worked on in the 4 years I was elected Speaker of the House was affordable senior housing. That's one specific area in our population, but it was something that I worked on with a Republican senator from Washington County, David Burns, in a political environment that it was very difficult to get anything done. We worked together to get that bond through, which is often the financing, the final piece of a financing, to make affordable housing. We need to make sure, I mean, it's kind of an all-of-the-above approach, and for me, it's about property tax relief programs that have been proven and tested and gutted in these last almost 8 years. Betsy mentioned, I think it was Betsy that mentioned the tax cut, $400 million, and when that bill came due, what are some of the things that the governor chose to go after to fund it? It was revenue sharing for towns and municipalities that often help with meeting their budget and also keeping property taxes down. And then a very popular property tax relief program called the Circuit Breaker Program. I don't know if you guys remember that one or not, but when people went to their town hall the next year to find out it wasn't available and there, it was a shock for them. Affordable housing is very tricky. There are some things that the state government can do, some of it is locally driven, but creating more affordable housing options has to be critical for the teachers and nurses that work in communities and they have to drive 45 minutes to get to their place of employment. We see it all over the state. So looking at homelessness, having a housing first approach, understanding that it is a comprehensive approach of looking at individuals' needs around whether it's educational training, mental health services that they might need, but housing is always the first. If you don't have housing, you don't have a stable footing. And those are a couple things that I would focus on. But again, this is a tough one, and anybody that tells you that they can figure out with the magic wand how they're going to drive down the cost of a home, I would recommend talking to them a little bit longer. But having a government that will have a big table for people that can come around and put all their best ideas on the table is the way that I would lead.
Thank you. And Diane, you want to comment on
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on what Mark said. The Housing First certainly makes a big difference, but in the regions of the state that are really struggling with homelessness are the urban centers, and that's where the housing costs are skyrocketing in ways that are really detrimental to fixing the question of homelessness. We have a significant, I live in Portland, we have a significantly high number of veterans who are homeless, and they are struggling with mental health issues. We don't actually, even though we have a pilot program that's working really well in the Home First initiative, we have actually run out of housing. So we don't have a place to even put people to house them if they are homeless, which is really problematic. So then you start looking at the surrounding regions, Westbrook or Cape Elizabeth, or all of the regions around Portland are actually wealthier than Portland is, and there's very little public transportation. So people can't even get to the places that they need to get to in order to be able to survive if they are put into housing in other places. So Mark is absolutely right that anybody that tells you that there's a silver bullet solution to this really needs to look at some of the deeper challenges to housing. My hometown of Bryant Pond, there are $300,000 and $400,000 homes, and then there are $25,000 homes that are falling apart that are for sale. I'd like to buy the $25,000 home if I could afford it. Thank you, student debt, for not allowing that. But when you look at moving people into rural parts of the state, there is no public transportation, there are no public services, there's no mental health services available to people. So when you're struggling with addiction, you're struggling with mental health issues, moving people into rural parts of the state is not an option. And all the urban centers and the coastline are so priced out. So we have to build the infrastructure for public transportation if we are going to be serious about this, or we need to get the housing bonds off the table, but we also need to be looking at low-income housing bonds that aren't just about the elderly, because there's a lot of people that are mentally ill that are struggling. And while closing AmHigh was probably a good decision, what we did is to move people into the streets and not into the communities the way that the state had originally envisioned. So we now have a lot of very mentally ill people and addiction-driven people who are in the urban centers with no place to go. And it's, in Portland, in the middle of winter, we have rooms that have just folding chairs, and there are usually at least 250 people that are sleeping in folding metal chairs because in the middle of the winter, because there's no other place to put them. And there's no other place for them to go that's safe, and we lose people. People die in the winter all the time, and it's devastating.
Donna, hang on one sec. Donna, briefly, please.
Yeah, just briefly. I think similar to recently, I've been I retired in January, but prior to that, we had worked with a lot of communities because we have transitional homes for individuals that were disabled, both mentally and physically challenged. And we were able to apply for block grants, which used to be just specifically for businesses, but now there's some block grants that allow you to take those transitional homes and make them affordable and assist some individuals going there. But that's just a small piece. But those are the kinds of things you have to look at. What kind of funding would allow us to take some of these homes that are within service centers and be able to get the individuals to be able to have a home, but at the same time be able to travel to transition into businesses and be self-sufficient and so forth. So those are things that I saw in the last, actually the last 3 years that existed where we could supply some money into there and work with some of the individuals for transitional home and make it affordable for the individuals that were moving in. That's just a little piece, but all of those pieces together, we could start seeing some positive impact.
Thank you.
Just another really quick new idea that I just have heard about and been talking to folks about is in Minnesota, when they build any, especially around Minneapolis in the urban areas, when they build any new development, any new housing project development, they are requiring as part of the permitting process to have 10 to 15% of that building be affordable housing. So that it's an integrated piece, it's integrated into the regular housing, so it's not just here's a project over here for, but it's, anyway, I'm very interested in it. It's being very successful and working out really well. So I think, again, it's not a total answer, but it's a little piece that I think is an exciting new idea that we might think about.
Okay, Adam. Right here in the heart of vacation land, we're having a very difficult time hiring summer workers because of the federal visa situation right now. What would you do to help Maine small businesses with their summer labor challenges?
Well, summer labor challenges, I would say that I have been to dozens of businesses throughout the state. I've sat down with labor unions, have been all over the state, and over 550 events, and the most common challenge I hear from every business, small, medium-sized, large, seasonal, is workers. It's workforce training, it's recruiting, retention, attrition management, finding high-quality, good people. And so it's not just a summer problem, it's a problem in Medway and Millinocket, it's a problem in Sanford, it's a problem here in Bar Harbor. So the best way to address our worker problem is to create solid workforce training problems. Stepping back and realizing, just from a demographic perspective, we have the oldest population in the country, in Maine. We're one of 2 states where our population isn't growing. The fact that we're having a hard time attracting and keeping seasonal workers is not a surprise. We're also having a hard time keeping and attracting physicians, painters, plumbers, electricians. It's all the way down the road. So the best way to address that is first with workforce training. I put forward a workforce training bond a couple weeks ago that really gets over a lot of the barriers that we have to have people find high quality, good work, allows businesses to be able to assume that loan to reduce the costs. Secondly, I think we need to create more of a welcoming environment here in the state of Maine. There's not much that the governor of Maine can do about federal immigration issues or concerns that people have with visas or other things, but there is a lot that the governor can do with respect to creating a more welcoming environment. You talk to anybody that comes into this state, whether they're in refugee status or whether they're in asylum status, they have a lot of transition problems. It's finding housing, it's being able to read a lease when you may not have English as your first language. It's being able to have somebody help you with a background check if your last place of residency was another country. And creating more of an immersion for folks to become more involved and included in the communities. So those are sort of the highlights of what we would need to do. I've spent a lot of time with the New Mainer community. I've spent a lot of time with lots of other groups within the state that are trying to attract different people to move here and to come here. I think creating more of a welcoming state, I think creating more of a culture of innovators and entrepreneurs, all going to be a part of doing that.
Thank you. Cell phones, connectivity, computers were mentioned a little earlier. Anybody want to add anything about how we get to better connectivity in the state of Maine, which we'd like to do better?
We all love to talk about this.
All right.
You could do that with one word.
I don't have to ask people to turn off their cell phones here because there's no reception.
There's no reception.
All right.
You could have done that as a lightning rod.
You want to start?
Well, I think broadband is the big thing, and I know that in 2008, I spent some time in Rochester, New York, talking to a company who had been for 3 years trying to come to Maine to do exactly that. And so I had the misfortune in 2010, I was the candidate that was 3 minutes late and didn't get my signature, so I wasn't on the ballot along with LePage running for governor. So, but I had been doing a lot of research. And so I found an organization that was very successful in working with contracts and getting the state to participate, but they couldn't get in the state of Maine. That's our problem. We need to get broadband here. We need to lure those businesses to come here and come in the summer and know that I can bring my husband or my wife and we can work here while we're enjoying beautiful Maine in the winter, summer, or spring or fall, and make it conducive for people to say, let's establish ourselves here. So I think we need to do broadband, and there is a lot of organizations out there who are very interested in doing that. It's time for us to step up to the plate and bring those people into Maine and get us connected so that you guys can use your cell phones, and we can also bring businesses and have more people staying in Maine 4 seasons.
All right, we know we need it. How do we get it? Anybody else want to comment, Diane? And then I'll get everybody. Yeah.
So I haven't actually had a chance to weigh in on broadband, because everybody else does, but there's some things to consider about broadband that are really important. One, our geography makes it very difficult to deploy to the last mile. Furthermore, the sheer rural and incredibly rural nature means that there are people that are never going to be profitable to get broadband to. That's a real problem. And so while I agree that we should be incentivizing companies to come here, we have. But the problem is that the FCC preempts us from overseeing broadband at all. I would love broadband to be a public utility. When the Washington Post asked me to come down and be a rural broadband expert as part of their conference, that was the first thing I said. And it was a highly controversial statement down in Washington, D.C. For me, I just think it makes sense because we don't have good broadband here. But one of the things we need to be looking at is that we're going to have to make public investments in broadband because the companies have no interest and no leverage whatsoever to deploy to those last mile sections of the state. So we're going to have to invest in municipal broadband. We're going to have to invest in public broadband. That is going to require infrastructure bonds to do that. And it's going to take some money for us to do that and some commitment. But the other thing we need to be thinking about is satellite technology. So I don't think that Sean Moody in his debate really nailed this issue. He said something about 150 satellites go up. Satellite technology is the path forward for us to be able to deploy to the last mile because our geography makes it very difficult. It's up, it's down, it's all around to get the fiber optic to where it needs to go. The other thing is we need to be looking at what that definition of broadband is. We have recently changed the definition of broadband, which meant originally we were doing okay in terms of deploying broadband, but now because the definition has rightfully changed, our broadband capacity is actually significantly reduced. DSL does not really count as broadband these days. The other thing is small cell technology for cell phones. There are technologies where you can add a small little antenna on trees and on not lightning poles, but on telephone poles, and that will help reduce the gaps on cell phone coverage that we see so dramatically in this state. So there are technical solutions, but they are going to cost money. They are going to be really difficult to deploy, but we're going to have to make that investment because if we don't make that investment in broadband, it is like not building roads. Those are the roads to the future, and if you want to transport your goods to another part of the country, you're going to have broadband to do that. But we also have to be fighting against the FCC's preemption so that we have leverage to force companies to actually do what they should be doing all along.
Take that one real quick.
Yes, and then Betsy.
So I think broadband needs to be determined be designated as an essential service. Broadband affects everything that we do today. Whether it's telemedicine, which is taking off nationally for people that have a hard time visiting a doctor far away, they can do a telemedicine. We have kids sitting in parking lots throughout this state trying to do their homework in library parking lots to get a good internet connection. And you can't sell blueberries outside of Washington County if you don't have a good internet connection. It is an essential service. There are several ways that we can approach funding for it. First, federal funding, which Diane was alluding to. Cranberry Island's just received over a $1 million grant in order to extend broadband out there. It's important to know, when you go down to DC, across from the Russell Senate office building, there's a place called the Hall of States. When you go into the building, 48 states have offices which really focus on getting federal funding. And we talk a lot about Medicaid expansion funding. It typically comes up, it'll probably come up tonight here. But there are so many other federal funding opportunities Maine doesn't capitalize. Just from a philosophical perspective, Governor LePage just doesn't believe in federal funding, and I pay federal taxes. I think that we ought to benefit from that. And I see NIH, NEA grants. USDA has a rural development broadband plan. That's really what Cranberry Island focused on to do that. I think we need to capitalize on that. And lastly, I'll say, with respect to a lot of the funding opportunities, the state taking a leadership role in this is critically important. Cranberry Island, a lot of these onesie-twosies where we've seen Islesboro and other places really step up and recognize and do it, it cost a lot more there because they did it on a smaller scale. But when the state first spread broadband out throughout the state, they did it in the libraries and the hospitals. And by the power of doing large contracting, you can drive the prices down. So it's that type of creative thinking that I think we need to approach it. There are groups like Axiom Technologies up in Machias that are kind of leading the way from the private sector on that. But this is something that we need to do from our infrastructure right away.
Betsy, you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with both Diane and Adam. I will say that I think it is one of the biggest detriments to having young people move to Maine and stay in Maine. So we've got to figure it out, and we've got to be on top of the technology, and it has to be a public-private partnership, because as both of them have said, there's no profit in getting to the last mile, to the most rural places. So we have got to figure that out. So, but I think they've covered it.
And I was just going to focus on, I think it's been exhausted pretty much, but I was going to focus on the why, and Betsy kind of did, of the importance of attracting young people here. They're not going to come if they can't plug in. Our mobile workforce and the generation that's growing up now, what we have to offer is our quality of life. That is what Maine has that a lot of places don't have. But if folks can't move here and plug in and do their business, they're not going to be able to come here and do their business. So that's the why piece. The bonding, I think we're going to have to make a significant investment and sell that to the whole state. I think this is an easy sell because it is a statewide impact and it has an economic impact for every community. So that's kind of the how and the why of it. But we are way behind, and we've got a lot of catch up. Just like a lot of these issues, renewable energy and a whole host of others, over the last 7 years, we've got a lot of pent up demand.
All right, thank you. This lightning round question is on an issue that is quite new to Maine, and I sympathize with the fact that maybe none of you have had a chance to really understand what it means, but curious about your gut reaction to allowing sports gambling in Maine, yes or no? Adam?
My gut reaction is no.
Betsy?
Yeah, my gut reaction is no.
Gut reaction is no, but really we need a comprehensive approach to gaming itself, because there's no plan for gaming, and that has to happen.
I believe there needs to be regulations because it's occurring, and there's a possible income, and it's been occurring for years, and it's behind closed doors, and I think it's time for us to benefit from it and receive an income from it. So policies and regulations.
Mark?
My gut is no as well.
Thank you. Moving on to education. Who went to public school?
I'm sorry?
Who went to
You
public
went to
school?
public school. Everybody went to
High school.
Okay. Do your kids go to public school?
Stand up, girls.
Yes?
Yes.
No? Yes,
Agreed.
yes, yes.
High school.
My cat doesn't.
Oh, your cat does. There you go.
Should get
Okay. Adam, what do you think are the biggest, sorry.
You lost your
I
mind.
think I did.
There it
Is
is.
that better? What do you think are the biggest problems Maine faces in K-12 education?
Cuts in revenue sharing. I was on the Sanford School Board, and I'm from Sanford. We have about 70% of our kids in most of our schools on free and reduced lunch, and lower income community. And when Governor LePage cut revenue sharing, it was devastating. We had to sit down. We couldn't hire replacements for teachers that were retiring. We had to cut arts and sports programs in the junior high and freshman level at a time when proficiency-based learning requirements came down from the state and unfunded mandate, and nobody really knew what it meant or understood best practices on it. We couldn't afford to send our educators to any training on this. It was awful. And we still, despite making those cuts, had to come back to the city and ask for a tax increase. So restoring revenue sharing far and away is the most important. I would add, Jill, as well, though, we need to have more of a discussion on universal pre-K. We're starting here with kindergarten. One of the biggest, most important investments that we can make is in universal pre-K. We're seeing so many kids showing up for kindergarten not prepared. So those are, I guess, the largest. With respect to proficiency-based learning, I have found, and I have no idea what the opinion in this community is, but I've seen 3 throughout the state. Huge fans of it in some communities, absolutely divided communities. They can't stand it at all, or they're looking at me and they have no idea what it is because they haven't implemented it. That just shows me a complete lack of leadership at the state level. They put forward a mandate saying thou shalt implement proficiency-based learning and provide leadership. And Mark's been the one that's cited over and over again, and it was at 8 commissioners of education in 8 years. And at the same time, we have a governor that's told our teachers they're a dime a dozen. So those are just a number of the issues. The biggest one, of course, being providing funding and, of course, helping our teachers. I think that our teachers need to have a higher starting pay in the state of Maine. I think that's incredibly important, where we're having such a hard time retaining high-quality, good people. Betsy wants to go.
Well, I think we have to rethink education. Our education system was basically founded in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when the primary goal of education was to transfer information. A lot of us remember the times tables and our facts that we had to remember, the timelines. Now, all the information, the facts that we need are in that little black thing that people carry around, that we can get whatever facts we need in here. Education now much more has to be with how do we use those facts? How do we apply them? How do we work together to make sure that we can use them creatively to get to the next challenge, to solve the next thing in Maine? And those things are not measured by a standardized test. I think our reliance on standardized testing has made teachers not like to teach, and it's made students not like to learn. And I think we tell students that they're stupid. And now, I don't know, the NUIA test, their score comes up as you're taking it, and kids go out in the playground and compare their scores. And they don't know what it means, and the kids come home and say, oh, I must be stupid. My grade was lower than the kids next to me. That doesn't help any student. It doesn't help any teacher. And I remember that one, I'll embarrass her because she's sitting right here, but I remember when Thea came home in the 3rd grade. And these girls are from Cambodia, and so English wasn't their first language. She came home, and they were talking about, their grades were lower than everybody else's. And she said, and one was worried that they weren't as smart as the other kids. And she said, no, they're just not smart enough to measure what we're good at. I said, yeah. But I think it shows how far we've come from education that's exciting and engaging and moving us forward. And that's what we need to do. And I already told you about my proposal for the seniors, but I think I also totally agree with a $40,000 base pay for teachers anywhere in the state. The other thing is we cannot have a state in which the quality of your education is dependent on your zip code. And that is where we are right now. So that is not okay.
All right, I'm going to ask Mark
Sure.
to respond to whether you think Maine school funding formula is adequate or what changes might you propose.
So, but it's in the same theme,
Yeah,
because
we're
I'm
going
going
to
to
stick
follow
with
up.
education,
Yeah,
so
follow
you
up
can
on that.
cleverly work your comments into the next one.
Yeah, because I agree with what Adam and Betsy said about their focus. What sometimes it boils down to is our priorities, and are we going to actually fund education, the 55% state obligation that the voters twice have asked us to. And the last time, they told us how to fund it. And the legislature overturned that. I believe in that funding mechanism. The people passed it, and in my first budget, this time next year, that's how education would be funded. I think this era of overturning what the people have passed has got to be reversed. We have to get out of that. And this is just, it'll be a reaffirming of a couple things. The fact that we actually do care about education in the state, we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and that we care what people, when voters vote, we're going to follow through. So I believe in a progressive tax structure where the wealthy are we're going to do something about income inequality in the state. We're going to put money into the investments, and education certainly is one of them. If you want to get into the weeds of the funding formula, Brian Hubble is here. He knows it better than I would say probably anybody in this room. But to Betsy's point about, she often talks about we travel all over the state, not all the high schools, not all the schools look the same in the different parts of the state, and that's a shame. That shouldn't be. So to reinforce that point that was made about where you live shouldn't determine your educational quality is a problem in the state, and we need to recognize it.
All right, I have a question for Diane, then I'll go to Donna, and you can say whatever it is you're holding on to, and I have another question for you. Diane, how would you ensure that education funds are well spent, and if a school or a district is underperforming, what should be done to help?
So we put a lot into local control, and I think we need to do that. And so I don't want to get into shaming districts. We see grading reports come out, and the governor specifically used those to shame school districts, often the same school districts from which he had cut funding when they needed it. I know, the two things just seem so weird when you put them next to each other. But so I think we need to focus on some key core things. One, I couldn't agree more with Mark. I love hearing you and Betsy go on about the rant about the referenda. Yay, that's always mine. So I don't want to carry the burden. The 3%, we didn't vote to fund education at 55% this time. We voted to tax the rich to fund education for our children. But we need to focus on literacy. That's one of the challenges that I think we are facing. If you if you move up from the 3rd grade and you are not capable of reading and comprehending, you are not able to learn anything going forward. Even in math, there are word problems. So we have to make sure that we are investing a significant amount of energy into literacy. I want to, underscore what Adam said about early childhood education. The conservative numbers are for every $1 you spend, there are $7 that get saved in, we need to stop the school to prison pipeline. But I also think we need to think in terms of like childcare, because it's also a workforce issue, especially for women who still, despite having full careers, disproportionately take care of the responsibilities of child rearing. What we're finding, the data is out there, nearly 1/3 of parents report difficulty finding childcare. And when you do find childcare, it is often unaffordable. It is exacerbated in rural parts of the state where I care deeply about. And just to give you an example, the average annual cost of Maine center-based childcare for an infant is $9,797, just so that you know, and by comparison, the University of Maine's annual tuition is $8,580. So you pay more in childcare costs right now than you do in tuition costs. So the cost, we are pricing parents out of the market. I joked about having a cat, but a cat is a lot cheaper than a child. And when our birth rates are dramatically decreasing, I mean, not that Mark and Adam have not worked really hard to keep up. I feel guilty. I don't win. I guess I know what I'm going to be doing, right?
Cats too.
And a couple of goats, as I recall. So we need to be thinking strategically about where the investments best have a return on the investment. Early childhood education, literacy, making sure that everyone is literate, and also my adult education friends would be very upset with me if I did not remind folks that adult education, especially English as a second language, makes a huge difference in making sure that adults can get access to lifelong training. So those are the 3 things that I would focus on.
Thank you. Donna, did you want to make comments on an earlier
Very
question?
briefly, I just wanted, because sometimes it's surprising, the 55% is an average, and that's why the zip code is an interesting thing, and some people don't realize it. Someone may get 7% in their community, somebody else may get 85% of their funding for schooling, so that people understand that's why the formula may need to be looked at and how it impacts. Pre-K training is important, because I always believe that you need to give the children the best option for successes, and that starts right at the beginning. And so as a result, we go back to the standards, which take away the teachers' focus on how does someone learn, because some people do horribly on testing, but yet if you talk to them, they have more knowledge than somebody may have taken the test and been, according to them, extremely successful. So we have to look at the whole concept, and literacy, and especially English as a second language. I think that is a key thing with children coming in. They cannot be pigeonholed, because sometimes they end up with a label on them because English is their second language, but they're very fluent in English itself, and so they should still be able to have all of the benefits and options to be successful. That's our new immigrants and their children and their family. So I think there's lots of other things that we need to be super sensitive, so that we're providing to everybody the best option, the best teaching capability, and giving those teachers who are the front line to make the decision how these people are going to be educated, and not having policy made in Augusta which regulates what they're going to do, and as a result, we do leave some children behind.
All right, and the new question for you, Donna, is name 2 characteristics or values you would look for in the next education commissioner.
I'm looking for someone who's listening to the people who actually provide education, so that they're willing to be open to suggestions and recommendations, and that they're upfront and honest, and their intent is to make every student successful and be able to go forward.
Thank you. Okay, it was reported, and I apologize if this is not accurate, but it was reported that Democrats removed a gun control plank from the party platform at the convention last weekend. In 2018, there have been valid threats of violence against both Ellsworth High School and Mount Desert Island High School. So we're going to do a lightning round on some possible gun control measures. So which of these do you support? Universal background checks.
Yes.
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 Repealing concealed carry.
Yes.
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 Banning assault-style weapons.
Yes.
Yes, but we've got to define what they are. That's the big challenge with defining what they are. So what I've always said is you've got to talk about the capabilities of them, or we're going to run into the same problems with the manufacturers. We'll just make something a little bit different to get around.
Okay.
But, yes.
Ditto.
Yes.
Yes, and what happened with the platform committee at the convention is awful.
Oh, okay, so that it is,
Oh, it is
that was
true.
accurate.
That is true.
Okay,
And
thanks.
it
Thank
should have
you.
never happened.
All right. Last one is, would you support sponsoring state buybacks of handguns and assault-style weapons?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Alrighty.
And we'll never get any of this done until we get money out of politics.
All right, there's a question on civil discourse, but since all 5 of these candidates are epitomizing it, I'm not going to ask the question.
If we argue,
You get this.
Thank you for encouraging voting.
All right.
I just
so-
want to say ranked choice voting, and I think all of us, and we have worked very hard at this, and we're entering the last 19 days, and it's very interesting to me to see what the press is trying to do.
Yeah.
The press is trying to pick us apart and trying to say, oh, we're opposing this one, we're opposing that one.
know.
That is so far from the truth of what we have done. Diane has said often, this group of us is working as a team, and one of us will be the governor and the rest of us won't. But we have all learned so much from each other about issues, but also how to do it. I'm usually introduced last because my last name is Sweet, so you know that. But I always say, I'm so glad you got to meet my cabinet first. This is a group of people that is very smart, and we all have something to offer. So if you start to see that in the press, especially in the written press, it's not coming from us.
Don't believe it.
All right, this is a
Well said.
question for legislators. That would be Diane and Mark. And Mark, as I said, had a 2-year hiatus because of term limits. But the
Same here.
question is,
Same here.
yeah, right, sorry, that's correct.
Came in and out together.
We did.
08 and 16.
The 128th
Republicans.
legislature could not reach agreement on many major issues. Why shouldn't that make voters question the ability of legislators to lead the state?
That is a great question, and for 4 years, in a very toxic political environment, we didn't shut down state government, and we actually got some things done. And the way that I led was building coalitions and spending a lot of time with people that didn't always agree with me. Governor LePage is an exception in terms of his ability not to work with anybody. I mean, even the Republicans, he just doesn't work with anybody. He will put a budget in, come at it, let it go, and come back 6 months later. I think experience is incredibly, incredibly important, particularly in this moment in time that we are. We're going to need to walk into that office and know what we're doing and get it done. We have 6 months essentially in this first session of the next legislature, from January to June. You need to be able to go in, know how the place works, have the relationships that are already built, and the trust is built with legislators. You need to have the relationships with the outside groups, whether it's environmental groups, senior housing groups, whatever the group is, you need to have those relationships already built. I spent 8 years doing that. Mike Thibodeau, sometimes when I mention his name in crowds like this, I get really long faces. He's the president of the Maine State Senate, Republican, pretty conservative guy. The governor went after him in the same way that he came after me. But we worked well together, and we built trust with one another. And last year in 2017, when I was termed out in February, he called me up and he asked if my kids knew how to ice fish. And I'm gonna admit it to everybody here, no, they didn't at that point know how to ice fish. He said, well, we're gonna change that. And he invited me and my family up to his camp in Winterport on Half Moon Pond, and we fished for 2 days. And we never caught a fish, but that wasn't the point. My kids were really upset, but that wasn't the point. We never talked about Paula Page, we never talked about politics, we talked about our families and what we like to do in our free time. We have to elect the leaders that have an ability to connect with people no matter where they are, who they are. And that's how I won a district 4 times that hadn't been held by a Democrat in nearly 40 years. Those are the types of bridges that we need to build. It is a remarkably difficult time in our state's history that the governor has kind of put a wrench in it. But I think that experience is really critical. And if you ask Brian and others, and particularly Republicans, about my approach working with them, we can get a lot of things done for our state with that type of leadership. I'm confident of it.
Diane, you want to comment on it?
So I do take umbrage with Mark Eves. I cannot believe you did not have ice fish.
It's a shameful thing. I was in the State House for 8 years. My kids were all me. No.
I am
They do
ashamed.
now.
I am ashamed. Hope you can hunt.
15, maybe.
AR. So I strike this weird, I agree 100% with what Mark said. Half the time the people that he was arguing with were me.
That is
Quite true.
very true.
So I come to this from an insider-outsider perspective. You know, I spent 8 years in the House, and for the record, Mark and I had the privilege of remembering, it's sort of like those of us that were born well before 9/11, we actually remember when our country was normal. We actually do remember when the legislature worked together. We remember when the tone was different, and it genuinely shifted in 2010, and it's gotten really bad ever since. And I think anyone here is committed to shifting that back. And you have to be fair. You know, I've held my own party as accountable as I have held Republicans, and so even though Republicans see me holding them accountable in the media, the fact of the matter is they also know that I hold my own party accountable. We need someone that does have the experience, but we're in a unique populist moment right now that we cannot underestimate going into November. Yes, I believe there'll be a blue wave, but there is a very economic populist wave coming, and it may not strike as blue as we think. And we need someone that understands how to both get the job done in Augusta, but that recognizes that there are bigger tools in the toolbox. So, you know, one of the things that I bring to the table is that I am a movement builder. I led the fight to legalize marijuana, as I said before, when it wasn't popular. I have been the leader on ranked choice voting, including the people's veto. It's been my baby since 2007. I led the fight to take down the superdelegate system and by extension the DNC corruption. And when I spoke at the DNC, my speech there on behalf of Bernie Sanders was regularly compared to Obama's breakout speech. And it was all about how we change the system to work for real people and to put power back into the hands of real people. And that's what I want to see happen. So yes, being an insider and understanding the process and having experience is really important. But we also need people who understand how to build movements and how to mobilize people to achieve the results. No single one of us can achieve the outline that we want to, the vision that we all really want to move forward. We need you to do it with us, right? When Barack Obama got elected, and we were the Obama kids in the legislature, we put our hopes on his shoulders. He got the Nobel Prize just for winning, right? And then we sort of were like, all right, we can go home now. That's not how this is going to work. You know, we win in November. One of us wins in November, and we're going to have to work to do that. Come January, when one of us gets sworn in and then sworn at, we need you to make sure that you're still standing with us, that you don't have that, oh, we can go to sleep now, because that is how we got in the position that we are in now.
I'm
So-
gonna cut you off,
Sorry.
Diane, because
Can I
we're
just say
running
one
out of
thing?
time. 1 moment,
Yeah,
please.
yeah.
Betsy,
I just want to say
Betsy.
that I offer the
Betsy.
sweet spot. I have been an advocate for nonprofit social services and environmental organizations for 35 years in the legislature. And I've worked on more legislation than Diane and Mark, and worked on every single budget that has come down the pike for 35 years. But I am not part of that system, the broken system that people are so frustrated with and has all that baggage. So I just want to say that I think I also come ready to work on day one, knowing how things work, knowing how to get things done. And as an advocate for nonprofit organizations, I get hired year to year, and I only get hired if I actually get things done. So I think I've got 35 years of working in the State House, again, knowing how it works in all different constellations. Got Republican governors, Republican senates, Republican houses, I've done them all. And so I think that there's a lot of ways to get that experience.
And you have started off with your answer to the next question,
Great.
which I will now ask of Adam and Donna, and that is, you haven't served in a legislative body at the state level, and so without that experience, what do you bring to your candidacy that should persuade voters that you can do that job?
Want to
Do
go
I-
first, Donna, or do you want
It doesn't make any difference. I think I've done legislative process when I was mayor for 6 years. We had a secession plan where people from different parties were very vocal, and for over 2 years they were fighting that they wanted to become a village and not part of Biddeford anymore. And they had gone for a couple of years, and I listened as a citizen in the back of the room during that whole time. And then I submitted a bill to the state committee that was overseeing that in the 11th hour when they were making a determination if they were going to allow the secession to take place. They said, no, we have this recommendation from a citizen and you need to look at this. Shortly after that, I became mayor, and within 8 months, we sat down with very volatile individuals who were really upset over many years of no voices and things happening, and we were able to bring them together, and to this date, that legislative coastal committee exists, and they have a voice in the committee, into the community, and they're still part of Biddeford. That's just one example. I said earlier we did the toxic thing. We had many individuals that were volatile, but we brought them together and we were able to resolve how they were going to look at our environment. I mean, we have these kinds of things. 15 years, the University of New England fought with their neighbors about expansion, and it was no, no, no. And within a short period of time, once I became mayor, I was able to bring the right people together, and they had deferring. They deferred to each other, you didn't do this and you didn't do this, and we were able to talk about the issue, put aside the personalities, talk about the issues. And
Donna, I'm
UNE
going to cut you off
let me,
there.
one
and-
second.
Go ahead,
UNE
go ahead.
became an institutional zone and was able to expand.
Adam.
Well, I have huge respect for people that serve in the legislature, but I don't necessarily think it's a determinant of whether it makes a governor successful or unsuccessful. In my lifetime, we've had 2 governors that didn't serve in the legislature, Ken Curtis and Angus King. I think they both did quite well. I know that the first office George Mitchell was elected to as United States Senate, and I think it turned out all right.
He'll be glad to hear that.
He would appreciate my endorsement, I'm sure. It'll mean a lot to him. But I'm not without government experience either. I would actually argue I have the broadest leadership experience of anybody running. I've served in local government and school committee and statewide boards, some of the most important boards. I have spent time in Augusta, not in the legislature, but I've worked on solar legislation. I've testified before the Public Utilities Commission, done energy work up there, and I've also helped write laws in other countries, which I think is fairly unique. I was a contract attorney for USAID. I helped write energy laws in Albania, Bosnia, Croatia, Moldova. You think it's tough to pass something in Augusta, you should try it in Albania. And that's just on the government side. I've also worked in business. I've worked on the legal side, worked on primarily clean energy, and I've had 3 combat tours in Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And with respect to leadership experience, which I think is one of the most important criteria, I'd stack mine up against anybody running for office right now. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
All right, we're going to have a lightning round. I think I know the answer to this one. Will you allow your departmental commissioners to attend legislative committee meetings and speak directly to legislators? Mark?
Yes, demand it.
Yes.
Diane?
I believe in censorship. Just
Isn't it amazing how basic these questions have to be?
Yeah,
It's like, all right, let's have a baseline of the next governor. Yes, of course, of
That's-
course.
Yes.
All right, then I've got a policy lightning round on several issues. Do you support same-sex marriage?
Yes, and have been a pioneer fighting for that.
Yes.
yes, voted for it in the legislature.
I campaign door to door.
Yes, same with Diane, voted for it in the
All
legislature.
right, do you support reproductive choice?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And we need to
Apparently,
expand
yes.
it.
All
We
right.
need to expand it. We
Yes.
don't, we need to
Right.
stop protecting it and start expanding it.
Yes.
Adam? Betsy?
Yes.
Yes, and who would think that Title X would be threatened now by the President of the United States? I mean, where are we?
Do you support publicly financed health and education for undocumented workers and their families?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and we need to stand up to ICE.
Just yes will do the thing?
Yes.
We can't help ourselves. I'm crossing off as fast as I can here. But, how about transgender rights, Mark?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Okay, I think that I heard from everybody supports ranked choice voting. Is there anybody who does not? Okay,
They better not.
okay.
She's gonna beat us up.
I will have a conversation.
Okay, healthcare.
Mm.
Betsy,
Yes.
what are Maine's greatest health challenges and how do you plan to address them?
Well, the lack of single-payer, affordable, universal health care is the number one challenge that we face. I think it's the biggest challenge that we face in the state. And I think, so, obviously, we have to fund Medicaid expansion right away, but then I think we have to move to single-payer pretty rapidly. The failure to have health care, people say, how are you going to pay for it? We're already paying for not having it, right? The fact that we don't have behavioral health, community behavioral health systems or available behavioral health, we are paying for that in jails. We are paying for that in emergency room costs. We are paying for people going to emergency rooms when it's the only health care that they have. We are paying for the failure to have primary care that teaches people about prevention, that teaches people about good food, good nutrition, exercise. We have decimated our public health system. So we are already paying dearly for it. Now I know that doesn't necessarily right now as we think about turning into cash, but we are paying for it and it is cash money that we are losing all the time. So I think we already have it. We have it for everyone who's 65 and over, and we have it for everyone under a certain income level and under, right? So it's just the people in the middle. We can no more pay for a corporate-style, for-profit healthcare system. We cannot afford that because we are paying for not only for our healthcare, but for our the profits for the lobbyists, for the labs, for the all along down the pike. And think about the perverse nature of that. They only make money when we're sick. So there's no incentive for us to be well, really, except that they smile and say, oh, we hope that's true. But, and then so I have a counseling practice as well, and I have 5 physicians in my practice who are trying to get out of being doctors because they are no longer doing any healing. They are spending 7 minutes with a patient to see what pill they can give them. We have to get rid of big pharma. We have to challenge big pharma, and again, this is a money and politics issue. The one reason we do not have universal health care in this state or in this country is because of money and politics. They pay, the lobbyists pay, and they dance the tune. So I think we're not going to get it until then. I just want to say two quick things.
Very quick.
I think we also have to start funding alternative health care. We have to look at Reiki and massage and all of those things, acupuncture, the things that are less expensive and are very effective. So I think that's a piece of it, and we'll never address the opioid crisis until we have it.
All right, thank you. Mark, Governor LePage says he can't or won't implement Medicaid expansion until there's an ongoing source of funding that does not raise taxes. Would you expand Medicaid, and how would you fund it?
Absolutely. It's already passed. It finally passed by the voters after the legislature put it on the governor's desk 5 times. It was the first bill that I sponsored, was a prime sponsor on when I was sworn in as Speaker of the House in 2012. We got it to the governor's desk. He vetoed it. It was a bipartisan effort, and we had 2 Republicans that flipped their votes on the override. It was heartbreaking. I was presiding over the vote, and when I saw that, I saw 70,000 Maine people that didn't get health care. $500 million every single year not coming into our state's economy. It is critical that we do it, and the choice that the governor is giving us right now is false. There's money in the Medicaid account that will fully fund through the year and a half, through the next budget cycle. And we can't afford not to do it. Every dollar that we put down, we get $9 from the federal government. So it is part of the strategy of how do we get healthcare costs down. I believe in a single payer system as well. Medicare for all would be the system that I think we would all agree would be the best to get there. Until Congress gets their act together, we need to take initiative as a state. Medicaid expansion, we have to do it. I mean, we have to do it.
Thank you. Status check. I'm determined to get you out of here by 9. I want to allow, I was going to say 3 minutes, now we're down to 90 seconds clothing statements from each one of you. So we haven't touched taxes yet, and we also have a couple of audience questions related to healthcare. So I'm going to ask whoever wants to answer that hasn't spoken recently, what would you do if elected to address the increases in maternal and infant mortality in Maine? Anybody?
I'll take that.
Go ahead.
So we need to, we have for too long put women's health and women's reproductive health as a side project to the healthcare system. We actually need to make it central. When you look at what's happening in rural parts of the state, Washington County in particular, the OBGYN clinics are closing, which means you have to go 2 o'clock in the morning if your baby's on its way. You're going down the airline at 2 in the morning and for 2 hours to get to Bangor, or you're going to go have your baby in Canada. Which do you prefer? Those are not real options. So we need to be expanding access to prenatal care, expanding access to reproductive health, making sure that low-income people have access to abortion care if they need it. But we have to make women's health central to the rest of the healthcare system, because women are the ones that really run the household to this day. And if we don't do that, we're not going to have healthy families.
Thank you. Okay.
Did you say the next one was open?
I did say. So the question is,
I was
you're
gonna take that.
all ready? What are your thoughts on harm reduction for addiction? Things like naloxone, needle exchanges, safe injection sites,
Yeah.
and fentanyl testing?
Yeah, I'm fully supportive of a broad array of treatments. If we've learned anything about, well, first of all, the next governor, hopefully it's me, will consistently be recognizing that the opioid crisis is a chronic illness and an addiction, and we're not going to arrest our way out of it. And for those of you out there, wondering all the different reasons why this election is important, there's a stark difference between us and the Republicans on the other side of the aisle, which have consistently said the way to address this issue is to ramp up law enforcement. I spent a lot of time with law enforcement. I sat down with the chief of police in Presque Isle and asked, what's the biggest need to address this in your community? It's the same answer there it is down in Kittery. It's more treatment options for people, every single part. And consistently, because this is a national crisis, we can look at other states and what they have done and how successful they have been, because others have been more forward-leaning. Some are states like Vermont, others are cities such as Seattle. But what we've seen to be successful has been the recognition that treatment options, people respond differently to different treatment options. Medically assisted treatment. There's the peer-to-peer approach, frankly, which strikes me as similar to Alcoholics Anonymous, where you're finding somebody else who's gone through an addiction and dealing with it. But there are different ways. I support the broad array of them. Again, back to the I support science type view. I think it's critically important that we do that. Vermont has approached it, and they've dubbed the term the hub and spoke approach, but I essentially just described it. I find it interesting that Governor LePage has cited the hub and spoke approach as a good example, and I would agree with him with that, but he ignores the fact that Vermont used Medicaid expansion funding to pay for it. He hasn't accepted those funds. So I think that's an important thing that we need to address right away.
Thank you. I'm gonna try 2 really quick tax questions. The first is, do you agree that nonprofit organizations should pay local property taxes?
I'll take that.
Go ahead.
You know, I worked 20 years with the nonprofit organization, and I found we worked within communities that in lieu of taxes, there was a small fee, and the fee was reasonable. I mean, for a $12 million operation, we had houses all over different counties and different cities, and the maximum that someone had to pay for their, in lieu of taxes, was $400. And I think there should be a base where individuals that we're assisting and they're using services in the city might have a small amount that they may be paying that isn't their tax amount. They're not paying, you know, $1,000 or whatever else. But if everyone that had a home that they're using the services of fire and police, and some of those use them more often. And I've worked 20 years for the individuals. I could see the paying a fee of $100 on a yearly basis to assist. And you think about how many nonprofit organizations and how many homes they own, that would be extremely reasonable for them to be able to pay that, and they are assisting for the services that are received. But it has to be very reasonable.
Thank you, Donna. Next question, do you support the idea of a local option sales tax? Anybody want that one?
I'll take it, yes.
Go ahead.
I mean, it allows communities an option to bring in more revenue. I mean, it's particularly needed given the, you know, $440 million of tax breaks that have been given to the rich. So the local option sales tax provides, especially communities like this, being able to make sure that the out-of-state folks are investing more in your community. I mean, you guys would do incredibly well here.
True that. We talked about it. All righty. I have one more question because I had it on the list and it also came from the audience. And it's not an issue I'm familiar with. Let's see if you guys are. Do you have working relationships with any representatives of the Wabanaki Nations? Do you plan to work with the Wabanaki Nations to develop mutually enforceable sorry, I'm backing up. That was not what I expected. Do you plan to work with the Wabanaki Nations for water rights on the Penobscot River?
Yeah. I
Go ahead.
yes.
Yes.
We'll get you all, but short.
Absolutely, and I'm proud to have been endorsed by Sherry Mitchell of the Penobscot Nation. I have been working with them for many, many years on civil rights work, and we need to reopen the Land Claims Act and treat our tribes as sovereign nations, not as municipalities. That's a basic thing to start with, and they absolutely deserve the right to their land and their water.
I strongly support the sustenance fishing rights. The big this comes up a lot because it's a big issue with Janet Melson. Of course, I have a commercial out about it in a sort of a lighthearted way, addressing that exact issue. And yes, I absolutely would. And I would also just generally make the point that the state has not had a really good relationship. It's actually had a miserable relationship with the native tribes. And it's not just about water rights. You look at the fact that 1 out of 3 Native women in the state of Maine are sexually assaulted. 70% of those are from non-natives. Nationally, the Native tribes are allowed to prosecute in their own courts those crimes. Maine is the only state that doesn't allow them to do it. So these issues have come up a lot, and the tribes would have a seat at the table if I was governor.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it was unfortunate when on the day Mark was presiding, my seat and bait was in the House was one of the representatives from the Penobscot Nation, and they all up and left because they wanted to become ambassadors because we had not had fostered good relationships with them. There's another issue, you know, you've got fishing rights, you've got water sustenance rights. I think we're all pretty much on the same page about tribal sovereignty. You know, the issue of gaming rights, the Passamaquoddy Nation asked for over 2 decades, 22 years for a casino on their lands. Not a huge fan of casinos. However, what they want to do on their own land is super important, that we do not judge that and we let them make their own decisions because, oh wait, it is their country. So, I know it's shocking, right? So I fought really hard to get a comprehensive approach to gaming, which included the tribes. You know, it's really frustrating for them and for me and many others that on the same year that the voters voted down the Passamaquoddy tribe, they voted for Hollywood slots. So the people from out of state who have all the money get their casino, which they upgraded from Racino to casino. But our homegrown people, literally, were, you know, again, prevented, and we were prevented time and time again in the legislature. We were thwarted, and you know,
Wrap it up?
Yep, that's it.
Thank you.
2000 and 2001, Bedford was working with the Penobscot Nation because we were looking at a resort casino. They were going to manage it, and so we had spent a lot of time looking at the impact. And obviously, it would have been very beneficial for them, and the money and the jobs that were available. And we had worked a lot together, me going up there and them coming down to us. But it was not voted on. It would have been a very lucrative opportunity for them, for the city of Biddeford, and for the state. And that was in 2000, 2001. So I know how hard it is to when they're having a hard time. We sat, we listened, and listening is very important. We watched and saw what was going on as far as the need for economic development and money. So, I would be working right with them and accepting them as their sub-grantee also.
Yeah, and we have to repair the relationship. It is broken, and I was presiding over the House when the two tribal representatives walked out, and I asked them, is there anything that I could have done? Anything that I could have done to help you stay within the House of Representatives coming back? And they said no, and I said, it's not about you, it's not about the House of Representatives. Well, they took some issue with, but it was really two people. It was Paul LePage and Janet Mills. And I almost didn't say that because she's not here, so call her, connect with her, talk about this issue with her. It is critically important that the next governor respects tribal sovereignty and can restore that relationship. I've got that skill set. I know that others on this panel do as well, but it says something about who we are and how we treat our tribal nations, and the fact that we understand tribal sovereignty. That it is not just another, as Betsy said, a municipality. It is a sovereign nation. So that is something, I'm glad the question came up. I'm glad it's the last one.
Thank you.
That's my opinion on it.
We are going to do 1 minute each for closing. That other Jill is going to time you. If you go over your time, Bo Green is going to come up here and speak to you. And you don't want that. So let's scramble up the order and we'll go. You ready, timer?
I'm ready.
All right, Donna.
I'm Donna Dion. I have 45 years of financial background. My platform is one word, respect. If we bring respect, we move the tags, we move what people's personalities, and we look at issues and we move Maine forward. I am very aggressive. I have big ears. I hear everything, big eyes. I see everything and really watch what's going on. I have a big heart because I really love the state of Maine, but I have huge feet and no one will run me over, and I'm quite capable of handling this position. So vote for me on June 12th as your first choice, and please pick up paperwork outside.
Well done.
Thank you so much for having us tonight. It's always wonderful to see you. I think for the last 8 years, we've been really tired of, we've gotten very good at saying no, indivisible, resist, right? I think it's time to say yes. Yes to what's best in Maine, lifting up what's best in us. Yes to universal health care. Yes to cleaning up our environment. Yes to education. Yes to fair taxation. And yes to getting money out of politics. We have a historic moment right now that we can do something very, very different in the entire country and show the entire country that we can do this differently. That is what these times are called for. Look who's winning around the country. Look at the people getting elected. Look who got elected yesterday. It's so exciting. We have the opportunity to vote our hopes, not our fears, and to really move Maine forward. I'm very excited to work with you. Please grab buttons, and most importantly, whatever you do, I hope I'm your #1 choice. If not, your #2 choice, and please make sure that you vote on June 12th, because this is a very important election for the state of Maine. Thank you.
Thank you. One thing, since Wikipedia didn't fill it out, a little bit more about my bio. I got into the profession of helping people as a family therapist. I was raised by two wonderful parents. My dad served in the military for 35 years as a chaplain. My mom was a public school teacher, and they taught us a lot of values that led to me to make the decision to go into the profession of helping people as a family therapist. And people have told me if there's any point in our state's history that we need a family therapist, it's after 8 years of Paul LePage. I think when they say that, they mean that we need somebody that's going to listen and bring people together and solve and get results. That's what I did working with families. That's what I did when I knocked on doors in a district that hadn't been held by a Democrat in nearly 40 years. That's what I did when I showed up to the State House for 8 years in a 200-mile round-trip drive up and back. Worked on Medicaid expansion, passed a marine economy bond, passed a $10 million bond for Jackson Lab, worked with Republicans and people that I didn't always agree with, but did that tough work of showing up. We talked a little bit about being the oldest state in the nation. One of our challenges is telling a different story. And I want to be the youngest governor in the country and the oldest state in the nation to tell the story about what it's like to raise a family here. Our quality of life, our communities, our schools. We have to tell a different story about the state if we're going to turn it around. Thank you.
Thanks for being here tonight. If you came here to hear some fireworks and people arguing, I'm sorry we disappointed you. We genuinely do like each other. We really do. Some good folks running. Here's my take on what I think our next governor needs to have for qualities and to do. The first thing is we need to restore a sense of dignity, humility, and service to state government because of this uncomfortable, toxic trend that isn't just happening in Maine, but nationally right now. We need our next leader to do that, and that's incredibly important. The next thing with the particular challenges that we have in the state of Maine with the older population and this consistent Maine's a great place to live if you can make a living problem is we need a transformational governor. We need somebody that's going to come in with a real vision on how we can do that, how we can bring people together with a vision on what our state looks like 10 years from now. I've been working super hard on this, talking, visiting with folks, and that's what I'd like to bring to the table. Be honored to have your support June 12th, first, second vote, same thing in the ranked choice environment, but thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So if you nominate me, not only do you get also the youngest governor in the country, you also get to break the glass ceiling and elect the first woman governor of the state. I'm here running for governor to put power back into the hands of real people. And that sounds like such a talking point, but the fact of the matter is, that is what this election is about. It is about who has power and who doesn't. How are we going to fix the system if we do not have someone who understands how to stand up to the systems and fix them? That is what I do. The reason we have ranked choice voting is because I brought this idea in 2007. It's because I coordinated a group of people to bring, I was one of the two co-sponsors of the original Citizens Initiative. When they stole it from us in the legislature, it was my group of people that went out and made sure that folks had petitions. In fact, the reason you all had petitions on Election Day is because I personally brought them to you here. You may not even know that. The fact of the matter is, you need to have someone that can chart a vision and who can actually do the work to get it done. I change systems, I fix systems for people, and I put power back into the hands of real people. I hope I can earn your first, second, or third place vote.
Just a few words. I'd like to thank TJ and Gianna and whoever else is staying up late in the box there for
tonight. Just really quickly, you may have heard me say this before, but you guys haven't because you don't know me and don't know us. But a couple things. I think there's an impression that Mount Desert Island is all set. You know, it's beautiful, we've got the park, we've got everything, but we have a lot of diversity, not maybe, we don't have a huge amount of ethnic diversity, but we have an enormous amount of cultural and economic diversity, and we need to be paid attention to. So I just want you to keep in mind that communities like us that may seem like everything's all hunky-dory, we have a lot of people who struggle. We have tons of teachers who can't afford to live here, and on and on. But the other thing to you is that, like you said, it's so lovely that you all get along, and it's so, I mean, I'm humbled that you are willing to put yourself out there. I know all of us are, but only one of you is gonna win. And what I would like, and I know all of us would like, is a commitment from all of you, whether you win or not. I mean, I'm assuming that you love Maine, and you love Mainers. And if that's true, then we need you whether you win or not. And I just really hope that you can commit to that work for all of us, and we need you, to the audience. You know, we need way more than a handful of people who try to do these things. Anything that you can do, if you call your legislators, you know, once a month, we'll take it. We'll take anything that you can offer, because we can't relax. It's too important. Like, this is what we could have. You know, this is a world that we could have, and we all need to fight and go get that. So thank you all. Safe travels to all of you, and don't friggin' forget to vote.